to be able to see people where they're at, and whether you're, more experienced, more skill set, how can you help nurture that person that is maybe just getting started in their career, or help guide them so then because then it makes your experience better too.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And I needed a drink of coffee, but I was distracted. And then you hit record, and I didn't use those 5 seconds properly. So I'm going to take a drink of coffee right now.
Okay, I'll do my half the conversation. You usually say something about Tucson. I go, oh, it's still hot here, and then we go back to you. There you go.
It's just a small sip of coffee. It's still hot. I don't know about I've never. So here's a funny thing, folks. By the way, I subscribe to the fact that you are un-American if you drink tea and not coffee. Tongue in cheek. Thank you, Black Rifle Coffee Company, for re-energizing that. But you know what? I grew up drinking iced tea and hot coffee, and I still drink iced tea and hot coffee. And I know a lot of people that drink iced coffee like it's some sort of newfangled thing, and I continue to scratch my head about that. And I'm going to go.
Come on. Yeah, because you don't live in 100 degrees, because iced coffee is amazing out here, because you need that energy, and it gets freaking hot. You can't be walking around with a hot coffee when it's 110 out. Come on, man.
Oh, you got to love your coffee. Got to be committed.
If your coffee's not making you sweat, it's not hot enough yet.
Pretty much. I mean, you finish that cup of coffee, and you don't feel little beads of sweat rolling down your back. It wasn't hot enough. Tami, I just got our good friend and guest, Tami McVay, and she falls into that category of why did it take so long? But also in that sense of, you drink iced coffee?
Occasionally. Okay. I have to be really tired, and the same thing. Hot summer day, I'm just not in the mood for a hot coffee, but I just need that caffeine kick.
I mean, why don't you just get up and do 20 push-ups?
Got to have the iced coffee so you can do the push-ups.
Yeah.
Well, and since we're going down this rabbit hole, did the Marine Corps teach you to drink coffee, or was that a habit that you picked up early?
No, for the longest time, I didn't drink coffee. I probably didn't drink coffee till my late 30s, and I went to
last week. Whoa, time out.
Beat me to it.
Yeah, I went to Italy. And we were waiting. I was tired. And so I had a coffee, and I loved it. And I used to brag about not needing coffee. Like I'm so good. I'm so energetic. I don't need coffee. And then I went to Italy, and then it's been all over since.
Yeah. Well, and folks, you ain't ever been to Italy and gone to one of those little espresso walk-ups, and ain't the same thing as an American coffee joint.
No.
I spent some time in there, and everybody looked at me like I had a horn growing out of my head, because I watched probably 30 or 40 people come in there and order a shot of espresso and then walk out. That was their extent of the coffee shop. Was that the kind of coffee shop y'all were in?
Oh, yes, definitely. Is there any other kind in Italy?
Probably not. I tried to make it a sit-down one. I mean, I had them make me an Americano, but one of those things, and what I want to jump into is you had quite the corporate career, and we've talked about this with large, not just a big company. We're talking like one of the Fortune, what was it, Fortune 50? Were they at least that?
No, I think they were Fortune 100.
100, okay.
Yeah.
That still ain't nothing to shake a stick at, because that's a big company making a lot of money and grinding people out.
Yeah. I know what it was. It was actually Fortune 500, but then they were one of the top 100 companies to work for. That's where I'm getting my
Oh,
injury from.
wow. So there's a double,
Yeah.
because it makes it even more interesting where I was going with this question. So big company crushing it on the, making a huge impact in the economy in the US and worldwide. And they were a good place to work, but yet you were like done with it. What happened with that?
Well, I was there for 20 years. And so a lot happened. Like when I first started, it was about 5,000 employees. And when I left, they were at 30,000. And then after a few years after I left, then they merged. They were bought up by Jacobs, which was even bigger. And so it just the environment had changed. I had changed. And it just felt like it was time for, something different.
What was the change you were feeling? Because at first, and I've only worked very small, like startup level. So my first thought was 5,000 to 30,000. I don't even know if I would notice a difference. It's a lot of people, just a lot more people. What was it that you were feeling that was like, it's time to go, it's time for something new?
Well, so yes, it was 5,000 people, but they were spread out across multiple offices. And I did work at the corporate headquarters here in Denver. And so it was one of the larger offices. But in general, it was still small. That was the time the internet had come out. And so it was the .com era. Being in tech, watching all these people leave to go chase money. And so the CIO put me in charge of the morale committee. And so it was my job I would plan ski trips and barbecues and really just help build that morale to keep people. And so that was the kind of environment in the beginning. And then over time, just as they grew, what was crazy enough is as much as technology was accelerating, they weren't really growing our tech team. So we had about 20 developers all those years. And so all of a sudden, when they wanted to implement something new, well, you still had all these things that you'd already implemented that you had to maintain too. And so just the stress levels started getting bigger and bigger. And I wanted to work more with people. I was never a person to just hide in my cubicle and write code forever. I mean, I could do that. I did that a lot, but I just felt like I wanted to work more with people, and I kept asking for that role. And they're like, well, we don't have that title. And I was like, I don't care about the title. I do it every day as it is. I just want to do more of that and less of coding. And they wouldn't listen. And then when I gave my notice, they gave me 7 projects to choose from, doing what I'd been asking for all along.
I want to, in retrospect, because having done what, and we'll get around to that, circle that bush here up in a minute, and what you're doing now. But in retrospect, I find it really interesting in the morale within under the CIO. Very counterintuitive there. But did you see in doing those things? Because this is something we've talked about here on the show and in Tribe and Purpose. Did you see a shift in culture, or was it like the ping pong tables and the kegerator type of culture when you were doing those things?
Yeah, no, it was not like the Google days, Facebook. I have another story about that. I went to interview at another company at one point, and we played foosball during the interview. And I asked them, if I want this job, do I have to let you win? So, and he laughed and he said no. And then I also
scored the winning shot right there.
yeah. And then I also asked if it was that I might accidentally cuss as we were playing, just because the intensity of the game, it just totally comes out. But thankfully, I did get offered that job. I turned it down, and they ended up going out of business. And so it was just that whole .com era. Like everybody was really enthusiastic. There were a lot of startups, and a lot of them were falling by the wayside. And so for us and our team, it got to the point where you could leave and go get a 20, 30, 40% raise. And so we had to be competitive with that. And so I actually feel like it really developed a little bit more of a family. Like you got to know each other better. So then when you were on these stressful projects or you're butting heads on a solution, that you weren't as angry because you have this care and affection for them, about their kids. And so I do think it helped. And crazy enough, because IT, you always had this opportunity to go somewhere else. I was there for 20 years, but that actually wasn't unusual. Like most of the people that I worked with had been there 10, 15, 20, and then now some people are still there at 33 years. So, yeah, so I'd like to think that I had a part in that somehow.
Could you talk some about what you think the mechanism was there with that? Because I think that's such an interesting thing of, talking about the morale side of things. Like, Dad, you joke about the ping pong and the kegerator, the pizza party in the corporate office when everyone already hates each other, but we all sit down and have pizza and that's supposed to solve things. We always talk about how you have to understand the team in order to, find the right solution to actually get something out of that. What are some of those other lessons, some of those mechanisms that you saw in that time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like when people start to be there that long and you get to know each other, you start to learn the players. And so if somebody comes to you and they have a problem and you don't know the answer, because you had developed these relationships, maybe it was a happy hour or, something like that, you'd be like, oh, well, let me go talk to, Sylvia. She probably has the answer. And so I got to the point where after being there so long, like I'd be able like, oh, go talk to them for this. And so I think that there's those unspoken benefits of, you get to know each other's roles without being like, I'm the boss in charge of this department. You actually just like, hey, do you know who I can go to for this? And it just builds this rapport.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that translates into like a newer team or an environment where not everyone has been around as much and there might not be as much rapport to build that off of?
I think the onboarding process is really key. I had worked on a project with HR at one point to really beef up that onboarding, because to make people feel welcome, to make them, not, especially if you're working on these high stress projects and you need the extra help. So you bring somebody in and then all of a sudden you're too busy. Everybody's too busy to actually talk to them and help them out. And so we created this system where, they would go spend some time sitting in somebody's cubicle for a while, and then they would hand them off to the next person. And so then they weren't just like immediately jumped into the fire, but they could observe, get to know each other, get to see what other people were doing in their roles along the way. So I do think onboarding is really key for those new people.
Yeah, I was talking with some folks about that this morning, and that asking those tough questions and going through that, because, man, it's amazing how much money is spent. I was going to say wasted. You could call it wasted if you want, on putting the wrong people in your team. And then just as bad, because I've seen this with the companies also, it's the right person, but you don't set them up for success. Mm-hmm. Was there I mean, you were there for 20 years. Was there like times that you saw that system getting tweaked to be better and better? Because that's a really important element for businesses that are in their growth stage. They're going to 10X, right? Is they got to get the right people in there, and then they got to set them up for success. What were some key lessons that you saw going through that, besides and not to belittle it, but besides the sit next to me today, sit next to Tammy tomorrow, sit next to Camden, next week, sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, like I said, our group of developers, we were about 20 people, and we stayed that way the whole time. So we didn't deal with that a lot. But to be able to, as we're working on different projects, we're writing software for other departments, watching them have transitions, and, you have your person, your point of contact, and next thing you know, they leave. And so then you have to, get the other person all up to par on, why you made these decisions that you made. And so I think it's just when you get to a company that big, that it's just natural you're going to have that turnover. And at one point I heard the statistic, it was $54,000 every time somebody leaves, just to go through that whole interview process and bring somebody else on. And so it's very expensive. In one of the charities that I work with, I met a guy who worked for Capital One, and they're very passionate about hiring veterans, and they actually wouldn't bring them into a role or position. They would bring them into the company, get them up on the culture, and get to learn their skills and find the right position for that skill set. And I thought that was brilliant. Like I feel like if every company did that, and where you could actually amplify the strengths of people that companies would thrive by having more of that.
You kind of said something that I've been pondering a bit. We've talked with some folks on the show about this. The idea of the turnover being inherent to the business's success. That at a certain size, you're just going to, it's kind of like the economics people stealing from your business. You're like, look, there's a certain point where they're stealing 2%. It costs us more than 2% to deal with it. Whatever, we're just a big business. It has to happen. Do you think it's really inherent to a business's success that you have to have that? Like, do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts there?
No, I feel like companies that really value their people as people, you recognize that we all have, families or health issues or stress, all these different aspects, even just our wellness in general, that when you really take care of those people and make them feel seen and heard, it's going to create a loyalty. And I feel like a lot of those companies, you kind of miss out on that. It's more about, yes, we can be friendly and get to know each other, and this is the role you're responsible for, but it has to be both ways. And I feel like the more, I think Richard Branson says it, you show you people that they care, or you care, and then they'll care about your customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to add, I was talking with the HR director last week for one of my interviews, the leadership articles I've been writing. And that was kind of the point we were talking around, was this idea of it's almost like a cop out from the leader to be like, oh, this has to happen. It's because of our size and those things. And then they almost create like a self-fulfilling prophecy with that. Of it's like, look, well, we're just going to lose people, so might as well not search as hard. And, might as well, look, does Tami come perfectly the right fit? Well, no, but, we lose people anyway, so might as well bring her in. And there's this kind of weird thing there where you almost invite the negativity with it. I make the comparison of Dad, you started off with Tami's got the flag there. We talk about America, if you have coffee versus tea, right? Well, it's like we talk about politicians all the time. It's like, oh, people talk all this crap about politicians. Well, if they're crappy, then we let them be crappy. There's this kind of weird thing that happens. And I think that can happen with the turnover as well, where it's like, it doesn't have to be perfect if we're going to lose folks with it. Tami, what are your thoughts on how to shift that culture of a business that maybe is kind of comfortable with that turnover?
Well, I went to a conference, and the founder, I don't know if he was the founder, but one of the executives for the greatest places to work, where they evaluate companies to, determine if it's a good place. They had said that they talked about how so many people, in order to make more money and to feel like you're prospering in your role, you have to take these management positions. And maybe you're not meant to be a manager, or maybe you don't really thrive on like nurturing a team. And so I feel like the mindset on the higher ups has to shift from that. On the flip side, when you have turnover and you're losing people, you need that director spot to be filled. And so you may as well, you want to bring in, internally, because their skill sets. But I feel like that does cause a lot of problems. And I know for me, there were a few times where I turned down roles. And at one point, my boss wanted me to be a lead. So I said yes. I said, but what if I don't like this? And if I step down, is it going to hurt my career? And she said no. And I did it about 7-8 months, and I really wasn't enjoying it. I really didn't have any decisive power over making my people happy, helping them thrive. And so I just thought, I want to go back to doing what I'm really great at. And so I think if more companies could look at that, how can you help them thrive in what they're doing, then it becomes this trickle effect, and everybody will benefit.
And that's a unique thing. Not having studied the greatest places to work list, but there's a lot that's a rarity. In knowing what I know about businesses, the number of businesses that I've worked with over the years, that's a unique skill set to have in the leaders. That company, and it was God, I had the name of it on the tip of my tongue because I used to drive by it all the time, right there on the southern end of Denver, that you worked for 20 some odd years. Did you see? Because this is something I've helped educate folks about also. Is you have this big company, 30,000 people, but your department, 20 people, as you described, has its own unique culture within it. Were you able to kind of peek over the partition or down the hall and see that maybe, thank goodness I'm in this department and not that department. See those kind of differences?
Oh, absolutely. Because when you're in IT and you're writing software for other departments, you get to see those aspects. And I remember being in a meeting with HR. We were writing some software for them, and the director of HR said, "We don't do people." And I burst out laughing, like, "What? You're HR? Like, how do you not care about people and really So, to see that and then to watch the turnover in other groups, and all of a sudden you'd be like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have that guy as my manager. Or if you got assigned to do project for them, you'd already know that there was a lot of friction in there. So definitely blessed. My boss, he recognized, he would see talent and let you experiment and try things. And in technology, like that's absolutely key. When we would do our, annual Christmas dinners with just our team. And so those little things definitely helped.
In your opinion, how do you grow that inside of the company? Because I think there's an interesting thing of like, you want those smaller cultures because that creates a great team environment there. And then I'm picturing, the two different departments. You're like, oh my gosh, what HR is doing over there. It's like, okay, well, clearly what y'all got with IT is, I wouldn't say it's the right answer, but there's some good things happening there. And what's your opinion on how you try to kind of spread those wins without, eroding those other cultures?
Well, so we would have some different friction with that because, being an engineering firm, that the engineers would be, put up on this pedestal a little bit, whether that was, self-imposed or just the nature of the beast. And so sometimes there would be a little friction there too. But I was blessed that when I first started, I worked with the engineers because I worked in the data center. So they would come down there and would plan out these, big diagrams of bridges and stuff like that. So I was able to build relationships with some of the engineers. And, so sometimes they would look down on corporate headquarters. Like it would almost be like the money we're spending is, draining from the company as a whole. But as you know, it's all cogs in a wheel. Like everybody needs to rely on each other. And so at one point, my big project over 15 years of my company, my experience there was that I wrote our company's expense reporting software, my team and I. Mm-hmm. And so I would get these engineers, I had this one engineer that blasted our generic expense report support email. And of all these things wrong with my software. And I felt my face getting red. My blood was boiling a little bit. And I thought, just go for a walk. So I went and I walked around the building. I sat down and I went through and I addressed every single one of his points. This is why we did this. This is how it affects your company's stock. This is, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, I said, I work really hard at my job too. I'm very good at it. And I'm sure that you could respect that and that you've done the same. And we're all a team here. And so he came back and apologized and thanked for my explanation. And so I feel like to be able to see people where they're at, and whether you're, more experienced, more skill set, how can you help nurture that person that is maybe just getting started in their career, or help guide them so then because then it makes your experience better too. Being in software as well, I did a lot with like help desk. Because people would complain to them about the software problems. And so then they would escalate it to me. And so I always made it a point to fix the issue, but then I would also explain to the help desk person why that was the problem and what they could look for next time. Because I thought if I can make them better at their job, it's going to make my job easier too.
What do you
There's a piece there. It reminds me, we talked about this in sports a lot. I use the easy rugby example of the forwards versus the backs stat. And you hear the backs complain too much about the forwards not doing well and getting the ball out, all those kind of things. Like, all right, well, come on in. And you could do this real quick. Hey, this is what it's like down here. It sucks, doesn't it? Yeah, you go back out there, do your thing. There's this funny, it's not even cross-training, because we talked about cross-training, Dad. That's not even quite cross-training. It's just a like, haha, this job sucks too. Let's not beat up on each other type of thing. Yeah. That kind of going back to what you're talking about with onboarding, all these different things. I love all the ideas there, but then I can hear these CEOs I've interviewed in these other leadership articles and the pushback of, well, then who's going to be working? If we're too busy cross-training and, shadowing each other and all this kind of stuff, that it hurts the productivity too much, that there's this like the whirlwind, the day job is too important for all of these different steps. What would you say to that, Tammy? Because clearly you have some disagreement with that idea.
Yeah, I totally disagree. Because if you already have to respond to them and answer in the email, to throw on one more paragraph of something for them to go like watch for next time, or give them a better understanding of, what you're doing or why the process is the way it is, that little like 20 seconds of time to write the extra paragraph is going to cause, like, it could save hours upon hours if that person understands the business better in some way. So I don't feel like it's a waste at all. There's also a video by I can never remember his last name, Vishon. He's the founder of Mind Valley, and it's called Happiness is the New Productivity. And so the more that you can like nurture that and help people feel like they're growing and they're heard and they're valued, I think it starts to pay off. And I'm not gonna lie, like coming out of the Marine Corps, like that was my only corporate experience. So I wasn't moving around all these companies and watching all these problems. I just knew that I'm kind of in a corporate bubble. But I did watch some of my friends leave and go to other companies. And they felt like the things we were doing, we were so much further ahead than some of the other companies. And so anything that came out of their mouth, they're like, you're brilliant. So we were just fortunate that we had a team that were forward looking when it came to technology. And I think that still applies to be forward looking in technology because everything's moving so fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it just reminds me of some discussions I've had with a couple of clients. One of them labeled it as intent-based leadership. And, if you take the time and don't say, here's the 10 things that must get done. And, oh, by the way, like you said, that little paragraph underneath those 10 things, here's why those 10 things must be done. Then if they only have time for 6 things or 7 things, they understand what are the 6 or 7 things out of that 10, because they understand the intent.
Yep.
And it sounds like, you were fortunate. Wait, I think I got it. CH2M Hill, right?
Yes.
Hey, yeah. The picture of the sign on the side of the highway just came to me.
Yes.
In a moment of clarity, which doesn't happen often. What were some of those key skills? And really, I'd even go into the root of it. Your boss, their leadership that created this great team that you learned so much from and had such great opportunities with. Were they gifted? Did they, study Jim Collins, Tony Robbins? Did they share any of that? Of, hey, Tammy, here's what I've been doing. Let me show you.
To some extent, we didn't. I can't think of any like Tony Robbins, like motivational kind of speakers things. I mean, we would do personality assessments like most companies. But a lot of times, you're busy on your project and they're just like, oh, you have to step away for this 4-hour workshop on, DISC. And you'd be like, oh, I got so much to do. So you do it and it was kind of helpful. And then you put your little card out on your cubicle of what, personality you were so people understood. And so did it help? Maybe. I think it could help more in the fact of you have that self-awareness, like why you react the way you do. I think that can be powerful. But no, I totally forgot where I was going with that. What was your question?
Any nuggets? I mean, because it is unique, and I know I keep going back to that. But in a large corporation, because I've been in them, both as an employee, consultant, and coach, all 3 roles, that there's a lot of organizations that are missing the whole secret sauce. And your team of 20 folks in a 30,000 person company had the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
So actually, one of the things, we had a great CIO. He, in my early days of starting, that he would do these focus groups. And you would randomly get picked. And so he'd bring somebody from help desk. He would bring somebody, that was a senior developer. And so you had all these new skill levels, and he would just start asking them questions. And I remember it was that one of those that I got invited to when he was talking about, meeting deadlines and why we were meeting deadlines. And I told him that, the longer you were there, the greater your portfolio of responsibilities became. And so when they implemented something new or wanted to do something new, kind of like I said, you still had to like do the new thing, but you had to apply it to all these other old things. And I said the light bulb go off for him. And so I think having a focus group like that, and as a new employee, I was probably about 25, 26 years old at the time, to all of a sudden feel heard by, this C-suite guy. Like it was, it made me feel helpful and a part of the team. And so I think focus groups could be really helpful.
I'm throwing this idea out there because it just popped in my head like this. It's almost like a jury duty type thing. And it's yeah, come on, pull some folks out there. Let's get your perspective on it. Taking the jury of our peers, right? Get that perspective, and it does a lot for the person that gets to go up there, give them a little bit of time off work to go look at those things. But I think there's an interesting piece there, the jury duty comparison. But I wanted to shift gears to something. You were talking about the idea of like the happiness as a measure versus productivity. To me, it gets into this really interesting conversation that I think we can have on a business level. Then you can see it a lot in businesses, but also on like a larger economic scale, going to the idea of, do we need growth? How much growth do we need? I'd throw out Andrew Yang because I loved his campaign a while back talking about these kind of things, but it's like, okay, what does it look like if we're not constantly trying to grow? What does it look like if we're not looking at, gross domestic product, what we're looking at gross domestic happiness? That's one of the ideas there. And I think it's a very interesting idea. Talking about inside of the business, the happiness measure there makes me think to this conversation we've had with a lot of folks, Dad, about the new generation coming in. Nobody wants to work, and they want to work at a slower pace, and all those kind of things there. In the econ world, you almost have this term of like behavioral economics of like the voodoo economics of, it's like, it doesn't really work, but trust me, it's going to work for some weird reason. We just got to give everybody money and then it'll all come together. There's this weird voodoo aspect of it. Is this kind of like a voodoo leadership type thing where it's like, look, we just need to focus on their happiness and you keep paying them competitive wages and all that kind of stuff, and the productivity will just magically be better, or the business will just keep working even though we won't see the same productivity number? What are your thoughts on that? Because I think that's a real conversation that people are looking at right now.
Well, I think that, given that during my free time all throughout my career, I was getting more and more into personal development. And then once I left my job, I really got into personal development. So I appreciate this question, because I do feel like it really, it's like one end of the spectrum to the other. And I feel like there has to be a happy balance. And so I feel like there were a couple of little things that made a big difference. So one of the founders, the CH2M Hill, that stood for the founder's initials. And so Jim Howland was one of them. He created the Little Yellow Book. And it was just this little booklet, maybe 10 pages. I had one. It's probably out in my garage in some box somewhere. But we all the employees got one. And it was just caricatures of the company values. And everybody just kind of referenced this little yellow book. Like, this is how we operate. This is how we operate. So it created, instead of just having a company's values on a website that nobody goes and looks at once you get hired, that it became this, it just became ingrained to us. And so as you would, interact with people and they brought it up, be like, oh yeah, yeah. And so I think little things like that can contribute to just a common way of thinking. And then the other was, I remember, a couple things. I was taking a personal development class, and, being a Marine, we can shut down our emotions when we need to. And just having personal development be new to me as well. And one of the lessons they talked about was, we are all one. And so they said, your homework for the week was to look at somebody when you're in this conversation or you're having this disagreement and you're just thinking in your head, we are all one. And so I remember walking down the hall and this database administrator's, crossing me down the hall. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, we are all one. And I almost burst out laughing because it felt so awkward. But at the same time, I think when you're trying to create this company culture and realizing that if one department's really struggling, it will impact your department, even if you're really thriving. And so the more that you can really understand what everybody's doing, just more appreciation you'll have. And so having those fluffy kind of conversations can really go a long way without, in the example of that video, they actually they pay employees 4 hours every week to go learn something they want to learn. Mm-hmm. And so, most companies can't afford that, doing something like that. But in general, I think having I think growth, we're all just naturally growth oriented. And so even when I quit my job and all of a sudden I had to learn social media, I felt like I was thriving. Like I was so excited to learn something I wanted to learn about versus this new technology or this new software language that I have to go learn for work. It was very different.
Dad, I want to throw it over to you a little bit, Dad, because I think this also ties in a little bit of what we talked about before, like the green-gray approach to problem solving of this, because even as you're talking there, Tami, and even as I asked my question, it still was almost going back to that measure of productivity. That it still is, at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, we're doing that. And you got your little yellow book, love that idea, and those kind of things. But it's like there still was that goal in mind. Do you think it's necessary, Dad, to shift the way that you attack that? Because I guess what I'm getting to is if you're thinking about it as the leader and I'm like, well, should I give people 4 hours to do what they want? And it's like, well, am I getting my 4 hours back? And there's this, or am I getting 4.5 hours? Like, it's like, there's this really transactional thing that the transactional approach to it, I think, messes up the entire idea of focusing on the happiness versus the productivity. And that's why I think it's similar to what you guys would talk about, Dad, where it's like, you're not necessarily, focusing on the big thing, but it's like, we got to build this thing here that'll eventually get us there. What are your thoughts on that, Dad, and how you kind of, shift the mindset might be the best way to look at it. I don't know.
Well, and I think if you are stuck in that transactional thought process, that there's the first problem. Am I going to get my 4 hours back? Matter of fact, I know this comes out later, but those of you who aren't weekly reading the Monday Moments newsletter, that was something I wrote about for this week's newsletter, is the ROI and how many businesses get so wrapped around the ROI. What if I give you, Tami, 4 hours to go be a better person? How am I going to measure that 4 hours coming back to me? If I say this meeting is going to have these people, because I've had this conversation with the clients before also, this meeting is going to have this many people in it, and each one of those people makes X, Y, A, B, C, D per hour. How much does that meeting cost? What's my return on that meeting? There's value in that and understanding that. But if you are hard tied, like you just said, transactionally tied to the I'm giving Tami 4 hours. Tami, go do 4 hours of whatever you want out of your 40 hours a week, which is irrelative. But how am I going to see where's my return? Because now I'm paying Tami 40 hours, but I'm only getting 36 back. What's the return on investment? Because I got the number guy going back there counting numbers, counting hours. That's a fundamental problem with your organization because you're more concerned about the transaction of here's $1, do a job in this amount of time. Here's another $1 because you're doing the next job for this amount. And continuing to do those things, you've become transactional, and the people in your team and your organization are now nothing more than a transaction. They're not part of your team. You don't really care for them as people. All you're caring about is what's the ROI. And a lot of corporations screw that up and falter and fail and wonder what's going wrong because they're helping out the stockholders for that moment because guess what? Layoffs look really great to stockholders. But you're laying people off because your performance sucks and you can't continue to pay people. So thanks for the the softball pitch for a soapbox opportunity.
Well, you touched on another piece there because I want to keep drilling into this because then we had this conversation about that Wall Street Journal study. This might have been a year ago, Dad, about the managers coming out of these big schools like Harvard and all that they were having really effective growth, but it wasn't really growth. It was getting a larger piece of the same pie rather than actually growing the pie. Is I think the way that we put it in that episode. Is the reversion to ROI, the resistance from the happiness, the voodoo leadership. I like that word now. But this idea of it's because the ROI gives you more certainty, and because when you talk about growing the pie, the reason that's weird, a weird thing that people kind of move away from, and why we tend to probably try to grow the slice like that is because you don't know it's going to work. Especially you take a stockholder example there. That is, I know that if we grow up this amount, that's going to work. But and if we just start selling more widgets, that we're going to go up. And we sell 10% more widgets, we're going to go up 10%. It's the math makes sense. If I'm like, look, I'm going to change the way we do business, and eventually things are going to work, and you have that really transformational mindset. Now you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. You could just as much be the crazy guy on the street as you could be the genius CEO. Like there's a lot of overlap there. I'm curious, Tammy, to throw that back over to you. What are your thoughts on that, like uncertainty versus like the certainty of ROI there, and how that plays into things?
Well, listening to you, one thing that my mentor says is your best ideas come out to play. And so by giving them a little bit of like leash so they can go learn what it is that they're intrigued by, it can stimulate innovation. It can help their brain relax. Like for me, I can't tell you how many late nights I would be in my cubicle trying to solve this coding problem that I could not figure out why it wasn't working. And then I go home and the next morning in the shower, it would come to me. This is the answer. And I couldn't wait to get to work because the answer came to me in the shower. And it's just that meditative state where you're just relaxed. And so by letting people grow the way they feel like they need to grow, it can help, just trigger problem solving. I mean, because there is, proof of, industry overlap. Like if you're always doing something a certain way in a certain industry, and then you read an article about some other industry that you realize like, oh, I could apply that problem. So I think it can stimulate those kind of things. And then we already talked about the cost of turnover. And so that transactionally you are paying for not really nurturing that person. And there's also, negative leadership where it's like, all right, if you're not delivering, I got a line of people that want to come and do what you're doing. And that's not very motivating and making people feel valued either.
Such a great point too. And it comes back to, it's all about the people. And if you aren't taking care of the people, then everything is transactional. And going back, your experience in the Marines, the Marines are big on that. What's the latest commercial now? You become a Marine. You don't join the Marines. You become a Marine. I think that's what they're saying. Mm-hmm. Think about that in, name the company, Tribe and Purpose, CH2M Lockheed Martin. You don't join them, you become them. That's a pretty powerful thing. Have you seen that sort of thing, a similar process, or let me even add a follow on to that. In where you're at now with your business, have you been able to help companies become, Acme Bricks instead of joining Acme Bricks?
I loved when the Marine Corps started using that, because I do think that it really is different. Sorry. I almost made it the whole hour. That I really feel like it comes down to that similar way of thinking and really feeling and empowering people to express those values of a company. And so that's where you talked about bringing the right people in the right seats to be able to, recognize somebody who values the same things that you do. And not only that, but they're excited about being a part of that. And so then it makes it easier for them to become part of your company. And so to really, take the time to do that right, the whole hire slow, fire fast, I think that it really is can pay dividends down the road.
Have you experienced that? And I love the fact you can tell it's been a while since I've talked with somebody who has that 20 years in a big company like you did. The fire fast. Everybody says that. And it's almost counterintuitive when you say, "Oh man, we're a team, man. I want to take care of you." Da, 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 you know, and it's like, dude, you screwed that up. You're gone. I'll help you, but you're gone. All right. Have you experienced that? And how do you help companies going forward deal with that? Slow to hire, quick to fire.
Well, in my experience, it's more about you have to look at like, are they intentionally, like, is their energy bringing down the energy of, is it becoming this toxic thing that's really creating a problem? And if that's the case, it really comes down to, it's just people awareness, emotional intelligence. Like, is it because maybe they're stressed out because you don't take the time to actually get to know them? Is it because they're going through a divorce? Do they have these other personal things? And maybe they just need just a little bit of, a break and nurturing and understanding for a short amount of time. And they're still a valued member of the team. Or is it they're just not a good fit? And if they're really just not a good fit, then, you do what you can to set them up for success. And then you have to, move on. And it's in their best interest too. If they're not thriving, there are places where they could be thriving too. And so I think being able to look at that as well, it's, I don't know, feels better, I guess.
It does. I had an NCO when I was a platoon leader that because the military, it's all time and grade, right? And he was the senior guy, and he had so that meant that the first sergeant said, "Hey, guess what? He's your new section sergeant." Okay, well, he sucks as a leader, and eventually, after several months, I fired him. And in the military, when you fire somebody, they don't go home; they just move. And we moved him into this role in the motor pool to maintain the records and orders. I don't remember all the details of it now, but basically he was doing the paperwork and making sure we had all the spare parts and all that stuff. He freaking crushed it. I mean, battalion commanders giving him awards, and just a handful of months before, I was like, "You're fired. Get the hell out of here." And so that's such a great example to think about having. I mean, and he was happier too, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot to be said for that, and the comfort in being who you are as the leader, making that decision. It's not an easy one, but it can be the right one too.
Yeah, and I think, like, really try to understand them. Over the years, like I said, in corporate, like, we would take these different personality assessments, but I had a mentor at one point that made us take 4 or 5 of them at one time. And then I took it with my clients. Now I take it extra level so I can look at that big picture of the person. And when you can look at that big picture of the person, you can identify other places where they could be thriving. Maybe you do like an internship in another department with that employee. And then if not, if that still doesn't work, then, that employees, you kind of know if writing's on the wall that you might be getting pushed out. Like I've had clients that they kind of feel like they're somehow in trouble at work or butting heads with their boss. And so, odds are they're probably going to start looking if that's not a good fit. But if it's a department that they're actually really excited about, like you said, they may start to thrive and you don't, lose that cost of turnover. You may just have to find somebody else for the role that you had.
Yeah, that goes back to the stop using your people as transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I learned today, and I thought this I kind of put a 2 and 2 together because you described it, and folks, when you watch this on the YouTube and you see Tami, you see her hold up her fingers. You said "little yellow book," and the thing that it reminded me of that I thought was so important. That is, it's not a book up here. It's not a sign in the break room or on the website or whatever. It's a little yellow book that fits in my pocket. And the reason that jumped out at me so strong is because when I was a young soldier, guess what I had? I had my little soldier book.
Mm-hmm.
I had my soldier job book that had my Army values, my mission, said who my squad leader, platoon sergeant, first sergeant, all these sort of things. And you know what else it had? What my skills were, because I got graded on those skills and I had to demonstrate those skills. Wow. Wow. Freaking U.S. Army crushes it again. Come on, business. Wake your asses up and make you can choose a different color. Doesn't have to be yellow. But choose a book, a tool that your team can have in their pocket and do, for lack of a better training, to go back to the Army time sort of thing, hip pocket training. Pull out that little yellow book and do some hip pocket training. So that's never knew I'd get that emotional about my soldier handbook. I probably got it somewhere still in that weird sort of way. Yeah, that's what I learned today, Cam. How about you?
Yeah, for me, a lot of different things, but I think the one that really stands out is the flexibility in roles and positions, and that's something that's very inherent in the sports world, especially once you hit the college level, it starts to change a bit, especially at the professional level. A lot of those coaches don't really like that kind of stuff. You have to be able to do your one job. Look at that. About 10% of our guests or our audience will get this, but David Havili with the All Blacks, like you got to specialize at a certain point if you want to perform at the top level. There's this weird thing that happens there. But I love the idea as a CEO of having that person that comes in and it's like, look, Tammy, I want you on the team. I don't know where I'm going to put you yet. Because we do the same kind of thing in rugby. And then the next level to it of not necessarily the firing, but then moving as well. I could think of one of my players at the U of A, his name's Ben, that he's a center, Dad, and we went to him. He's like, dude, you're not going to be playing center much this year if you look at the depth chart. You want to play flanker? And he's been with me in the forwards for about a month now, loving it, absolutely loving it. And it's because he loves the team, loves the game, wants to perform, and just needed a spot where he could perform at the level that he wants to. And I think that flexibility as the leader to be able to give people the time to see where they might fit, move people around and those kind of things. And then when somebody hits that wall, not just, hey, you're done here. What are you doing? It's like, okay, let's try you over here. Let's see if I think this spot could work for you. We could fire you or you could come over to this spot. Which one do you want? And that is a much better approach to it to give people that opportunity.
Tammy, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, well, so on the flexibility piece, with it, when I first started with 5,000 employees, you had to fill a lot of roles. And so you'd be doing database administration, you'd be writing websites, all these different things. And so when I did go to apply at the other job, they wanted a heads down developer. And I was like, oh, that sounds awful. And so I think that was part of it too. I was able to find what I was good at because of that flexibility, and it allowed me to see things in a bigger picture. So I'm glad that you brought that up again. For me,
wait, I want to ask: Did you then specialize all the way in, or you still keep the flexibility? Because
I still keep the flexibility. I feel like that is truly one of my superpowers, is that big picture view, and it's because I was able to be flexible in all these things. And the very last project I was on, I was in a room with 40 stakeholders, and they're talking about their departments, and I'd chime in like, no, this is how your stuff works. This is how your stuff plugs in with their stuff. And so I feel like it made me more valuable, that flexibility. So what I learned is really listening to Cam keep talking about the voodoo, leadership, and that I hadn't really thought about that struggle for CEOs and C-suite of really trying to find that balance, and especially with the generations that people will mock, Gen Z or whatever, but I feel like Gen X, we're all seeing the world shift, and you see what's possible on the internet. And so you want that freedom and flexibility as you get older. And then the younger, they want that freedom and flexibility too. So I feel like there is more common ground there than we realize. And so I think I just have an appreciation for just that, the balance that a C-suite has to find between transactional people and the voodoo side.
Awesome. Tammy, how do folks find you, learn more about what you got going on?
The best place is my website, TamiMcVay.com. I'm on most of the socials. You can find me there as well. And I love to connect and get to know people.
Awesome. Tami, it has been a lot of fun having you here today, and really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Yes, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation. It's not often I get to have that deep corporate conversation.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Tami McVay, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.